Okay, fab. Hi everyone. Welcome to our talk today, which is going to be on how we transition from moments to movements in this new social age and really understand how we can add value and insight by unlocking the power of community and culture. So first of all, I'm going to start by introducing myself and Loop. Chances are you don't know either of us because I'm quite new to this speaker circuit, and Loop is actually only 2 months old, so she's still a baby. So I'll give you a bit of background on myself. I've spent the last 13 years in the publishing industry, starting off with the giants like News UK, Time Inc., and then shifting to the social first world of the Lad Bibles, the BuzzFeeds, the Joe Medias, the Frida. And during that time, I've spent the majority of my experience working across brand partnerships. And that's across multiple different verticals and sectors, activating across potentially over 100 partnerships across multiple different verticals, and also responding to briefs worth hundreds of millions of pounds. So trust me when I say I really do understand the problems that brands are facing today. I've also seen firsthand the shifts that have been happening in this industry, from platforms emerging, from new technology developing that's really been stealing the spend from the publisher landscape. But overall, it's the turbulent changes that we're all seeing and experiencing. Loop was born as a response to this. We're a community-first agency that helps connect forward-thinking brands to diverse and engaged audiences globally. And it was really born as a response to what was happening. We saw publishers struggling, we saw agencies trying to find new ways of efficiencies, and really brands having difficulty connecting to new generation audiences. The way that we're set up is very similar to an influencer agency, but except for we don't represent creators, we represent the most powerful and engaged communities and publishers out there. We help brands build very deep and authentic connections with these communities, and it's our core belief that when brands try to connect with them as opposed to target them, we can really shift the metrics that we're all struggling with, which is trust and cultural relevancy and engagement. However, I'm not here to pitch Loop today. I'm here to share some insights on how we can unlock community and culture and tackle the very real challenges that we're all collectively facing. So let's start off by discussing some of the more fundamental shifts that are happening in consumer behavior. So we know that the way consumers engage is changing. We're not just following brands, influencers, celebrity endorsements as blindly as we once were. We're really prioritizing meaningful and authentic connections. That's whether it be community-based, whether it be publisher-based, whether it be something that relates to us and that really engages us and pulls on the emotional heartstrings. Consumers aren't settling for shallow transactions, and it's seen here by this statistic on how fragile brand trust is. So 61% of consumers will distrust brands until they see real transparent action. And conversely, 58% of consumers will actively advocate and buy from brands that share the same values. What does this mean? This means that we really need to shift the way that we're behaving, and we really need to shift the way that we're showing up. It means that if you win, the potential is endless, but also if we lose, your brand faces a big trust risk long term. If it's not nurtured, it's lost. How you share your values is a completely different story. So how do we do this? Brands need to move beyond momentary engagement and start cultivating lasting organic movements through the power of culture and communities. So momentary engagement refers to the viral moments that we're seeing dominate the social media cycles at the moment. And the movements I'm discussing is very much rooted in community, where trust is built over time through shared values and in authentic interaction. I'm going to discuss this in 4 ways. First of all, it's shifting from those movements to moments. Second of all is going to be how we unlock the power of the communities that are out there on social and in real life. Third of all, we're going to discuss why this all matters in the new trust economy. And fourth up is how the future is community-driven. So part 1, from moments to movements. Let's break this down and dig a little bit deeper in terms of what I mean when I say moments and movements. So for us, a moment is a stunt. It's jumping on the back of a trend, a viral moment, a viral person, whether it's tube girl, train guy. It's a response to something that's happened in society or a societal trend that's appeared on social. They can work in the right context, and they can create buzz and talkability and maybe drive your brand's reach and engagement up for a temporary period of time. However, does this burst of attention and high visibility really generate existing and long-term change, or long-term, how do I describe it? Long-term consumer view of the way that your brand is operating? Not really. Let me go slightly meta and show you a meme of the life cycle of a meme. So there's many out there that would argue that once a brand has jumped in on a trend, it's already over. So you can see here something happens that's drove attention, it's drove excitement within a specific community or an audience. People jump in, people get involved, views go up, the algorithm begins to favor it, and then a brand comes in. And yes, some brands will get it right, and there's good context, and it makes sense, and maybe it will be a momentary laugh on the feed, but then brands flock. Everyone wants to jump in, everyone gets involved, and then the trend becomes slightly more irrelevant. So it's kind of similar to when Rishi Sunak got caught wearing Sambas, and then all of a sudden Sambas just stopped having their moment altogether. Now, no offense to Sambas, I still love them, and they're still a great part of a capsule wardrobe, but they just don't really have that buzz or their excitement that they had when it was like really underground and within the sort of social sphere. There's also the opposite end of things, which is when you do it and it goes really wrong. So I'm sure everyone here knows about Brat Summer. It's this lighthearted trend dominated by Charlie XCX. Everyone's jumped on the back of it, and it's caused quite a buzz. There's an example of NATO here who jumped on the back of it and posted this peace sign. And this was potentially one of the worst I've seen over the last few months in terms of when a brand gets called out, because not only are NATO a very serious organization with very serious responsibilities to not only young generations, but also the world at large, they just, you look at their feed, you look at everything they do, you look at the way that they're, the makeup of their social behavior, and it was nothing like Brat Summer. There is nothing Brat about NATO, but I understand the desire to jump on the back of it, but it just doesn't work. And in fact, it causes harm to your brand. That being said, this post had, I think it was 4 times more engagement than anything else I saw on NATO's post for the last month. What I'm trying to say is that the engagement doesn't necessarily mean it's doing anything good for your brand. And don't get me wrong, there are brands that do it fantastically well. You've got brands like Marc Jacobs who have made it an inherent part of their DNA and identity to really respond to everything that's happening on social. And to be honest, they are the ones that really create their own memes, like the Nara Smith baking a Marc Jacobs bag from scratch. There's also Duolingo, who did an amazing talk yesterday, who have made that an inherent part of their personality. On the flip side of things, movements aren't just viral moments. They're also societal things that are happening that relate directly to an identity. So take Pride, Black History Month, International Women's Day. And these ones, again, I advise to exercise caution, because I know with a lot of brands, the intention is there to show up around these moments. However, if there isn't an ongoing commitment to supporting that community and, really making it an inherent part of your business, then again, it can really fail. Now, let's juxtapose this with what a movement is. A movement is a commitment to making a positive impact long-term and not just making a splash. It's the intention to create something much more long-lasting, much more meaningful, and the intention is to open up a conversation with a community that's ongoing, where you keep showing up, you keep staying engaged. Movements connect deeply and build those lasting relationships with audiences. And what they also do is enable you to show up around moments as and when they happen, and in an authentic way. A great example of this, and probably the most classic example of this, is Dove. So Dove's had a commitment to real beauty for the last 20 years. When things happen in society, whether it's COVID-19 or let's take this AI beauty topic that's circulating, Dove has built the authenticity to show up and discuss that. But again, it's built on that long-term connection. You also take Skittles, who have made supporting the LGBTQIA community an inherent part of their mission. They've also partnered with very powerful advocates and communities across the industry, whether it's Gay Times or Pink News, in order to make sure that they are engaging with that community in the correct way. What this means is that even when Skittles misses the mark, which they have, back in 2017, they made the Skittles packet white and removed the color. It meant they already have an ongoing dialogue with the community where they can learn. They can have that two-way conversation where they can learn from their mistakes, move on and do something better and show up better for that community, which then, again, I think this was 2021, they removed the color again with the strapline of "Pride should always be colorful." So they were able to repeat the repeat the mistake but in an authentic way and partner with an authentic community to explain why they did it, why it makes sense, and why it's them showing up. However, movements, again, aren't always serious, and they don't always have to be so purpose-rooted. And when I say purpose, I mean society issues. You can also have movements like Domino's, who have, they're basically the unofficial sponsor of everything, which allows them to show up across multiple fan communities. Then you have a brand like Aldi, who are very known for their dupes. But again, that's based on an understanding of who their consumer is, and this idea that their consumer deserves to have, you know, their faves for less. And again, none of these are rooted to one single community, especially with Aldi and Domino's, but what it gives is them the power to show up. So next up, we're going to talk about unlocking the power of community. Now, I've probably said community about 30 times now, so it makes more sense to actually dive into what we mean. I'm not going to read through these examples here or these dictionary definitions here, because I can assure you that everyone in this room will have a different definition of what community means. The threads of what bring community together is an interlinked environment, shared identity, and shared interests. And basically, these are the foundation of how a community shows up. Community means a lot of different things to different people, but essentially what it creates is a sense of belonging. It comes in all shapes and sizes. It can be 5 million to 5,000. But an authentic community will succeed when it provides value to its members, and it will flourish when there's a clear purpose and they stay true to it. True communities develop over shared values and culture, not products and brands, and I think that's really what we need to land here. And what I'll go into later is how a brand can and should show up in communities and within movements. Again, they're not all mission and social purpose driven. They can be communities rooted in humor or rooted in something super niche. I know one of my favorites is, and it never actually gets talked about at any of these events, but it's called digital chadvertising, which is like a fantastic industry sleuth account, essentially. And then there's also HR problems, again, relating to our employee work life. There's also accounts like Archbishop Banterbury that cemented itself in UK humour and culture and now boasts an audience of over 8 million across all platforms. So again, they can be so many different things. I guess it's understanding how and where people gather across social and beyond. Let's take one of our communities that we work with at Loop, and probably one of our biggest communities, if I remember correctly. I'm Just Bait. I'm not sure, many of you probably follow it already, intentionally or unintentionally, but I'm Just Bait has 4.8 million followers across social, and I believe 8 million followers across its multiple different accounts. So this is a community that started in 2014, and it was very much rooted in celebrating UK Black culture. Its content featured news, viral moments, celebrating its members of its community, and essentially opening up conversations that actually felt relevant, which potentially wasn't happening at the time across multiple different social publishers and accounts that were open. The reason I'm Just Bait is such a powerful community is because, like I said, it opens up conversations that are going to be relevant for the people who follow it. Whether it's celebrating the 340 Brampton Manor students who achieved straight A stars and A's on their GCSEs, and talking about how the future of Britain is incredibly bright, in a very difficult cultural context when this came out a few weeks ago, right the way through to whether the UK government is doing enough on knife crime or whether the resources are actually going to the right places. Again, the community sparks conversation. You had Idris Elba jumping in the comments section and asking what he can do to help support this cause, and if, I'm Just Bait needed any help raising the awareness of the topics that they're raising. Right the way through to the community arguing that actually the government should be investing more in community centres and opportunities for young people, as opposed to just investing hundreds of millions of pounds. What I'm saying here is that these communities already have movements available. They already have conversations that you can get involved in, but we're kind of in this space where we just automatically go to the huge authoritarians that exist in the publishing industry. And don't get me wrong, I've worked with them and they're fantastic and they definitely do the job that they need to do. But if we're talking about building something more authentic, this is the space that you need to be playing in. Last up, I'll show you I'm Just Bait's latest original content format that they've executed, which is essentially asking children or Gen Alpha to become therapists to really cool, active, influential creators that are existing in the UK. Again, brands always say, how do we bridge these generational gaps? How do we ensure that we future-proof against Gen Alpha? Another example about a community that is doing something great that brands can join in on, that feels authentic, that is essentially untapped. And I'm not just talking about purpose, it's also performance. Like, we're not talking about tiny, tiny reach or tiny, tiny scale or micro-influencers. We're talking about huge, untapped, organic engagement that is rarely seen the light of day by brands. The average benchmark in the industry is 0.56% engagement rate across the majority of publishers. I think for influencers, it's about 0.75. Yeah, I'm Just Bait has an average engagement rate of 3%. And many of its posts see over 30% engagement if they get the tone right and the moment right. You have Diet Paratha, which is a community for Southeast Asian women, which has 152K followers and an 8% average engagement rate, which is also the same engagement rate for Archbishop of Banterbury. And then you have an account like Vibes of a Black Girl with 194 followers and 15% organic engagement rate. Again, completely untapped, again, with a wealth of movements and conversations and authority that is just there waiting to be tapped in on. So the Loopverse. How does Loop help connect brands with these communities? Essentially, we serve both sides. On the one hand, you have our service to brands, where we connect them to these communities and we help them find these organic threads. On the other hand, we have communities. We facilitate their commercialization. You know, many of these communities are only ran by 1 or 2 people and potentially even as a side job. So they're generating hundreds of millions of reach and engagement every single day, but it's not being tapped into. So we serve as their commercial organization, helping safeguard on both sides, whether it's brand safety, but also ensuring these communities are able to curate campaigns that feel authentic and match their brand identity, just as Zyra was speaking about on this talk before this. Of the communities that we look after, this is basically just a little taster. The majority of you here will probably follow at least 2 or 3 of these, and this is because you're human and we're not homogenous. We straddle multiple different identities, multiple different interests, and multiple different engagement points, and multiple different cultures. What we do at Loop is create the foundation for brands to build trust with these engaging, culturally relevant, and highly authentic pages. In terms of our approach, we help brands become an inherent part of the communities. Like I said, they're just crying out to have brands that resonate and share values with them come on and join the conversations. So the problem is most brands focus on selling as opposed to connecting, and ultimately those things are tied together. What we do at Loop is that we ensure every single community we onboard is very unique and has its own USPs. They tell us who they want to work with, what types of campaigns they want to run, what products perform best, what formats work best, when the time of day to post, what categories they want to develop. They give us their insights, their best ideas, their best practices, and also their data. We ensure that we follow an inclusive planning model. So just like audiences and campaigns are rarely there to target one specific type of person. Usually it's more interlinked and overlapping communities. We ensure that there is an inclusive planning system that happens where we bring multiple communities together for one campaign to ensure that each identity is represented. We also reinvest 8% of our profits back into those communities because the future of growth isn't just by taking, it's actually by giving back and allowing them to build the tools they need to become the next future publishers. And again, ensuring best practices and authentic engagement, emphasizing the alignment to the community values, because if they don't get it right, again, like Cyrus said just before this, you will get called out. But the best thing about being a part of these communities from the early stages is that you can actually actively engage with them. They can explain to you, they can lend you their authority, they can tell you what to watch out for, they can tell you how to build a strategy, and you can work much more collaboratively as opposed to just targeting an audience, you're communicating with them. And you don't have to choose between reach and resonance. With our proposition in the communities we work with, we harness the scale of major media and the power of community virality. So please do not think about Loop and think about these communities as micro-influencers or just a D&I add-on. It's essentially the makeup that we need to help brands become more relevant. Why does this matter in the new trust economy? So many of you may have heard that we are entering late-stage social media where essentially trust is slipping. Everyone is becoming more skeptical, but also all of these platforms are kind of merging into one. Everyone has the same offering. I actually only saw today that LinkedIn has introduced Reels now. So basically, it's not like you're going to different places for different things. Audiences are really picking up on this, and they're talking back. They really expect brands to show up and be involved in these societal conversations. There was a statistic that says 75% of Gen Z expect and demand that brands participate in societal issues and expect them to spark conversations and contribute positively. My advice to you guys is show up where they're showing up, which is within these organic spaces. Purpose washing. I touched on this earlier, but I really, again, need to caution against this, because when brands adopt superficial messaging around social justice, the backlash is real, and it has much longer lasting effects. Even if you've broke out of the news cycle, that is still inherently there. And when these consumers and these Gen Z come to become, maybe your main base of audience, it will matter. What I'm going to suggest is that you can leverage the authority of these communities, because they are built by their audiences, it's content for them and by them, and again, they are untapped sources. Cutting through the noise. So I know this is obviously a big problem with brands and businesses, but again, I want to reiterate that these are very brand-like spaces. I think I used the I'm Just Bait example. They've worked with a few key brands, but again, mainly on these PR and communication-based initiatives. What you have the opportunity to do is enter a space with high engagement, high reach, that isn't fighting for eyeballs with 100 other brands like the majority of main-scale publishers, which, again, I know that plays a role sometimes, but if you want to create relevancy, which is my next point, you need to be in these spaces where no one else is forming these deep, long-lasting relationships. And again, it becomes two ways. You create a value loop between yourselves and these communities. Cultural relevancy. These communities aren't just reflecting culture, they're dominating it, they're creating it, they're commenting on it, and they're bringing and inviting their communities to do the same thing. Brands that align with these communities in a long, meaningful way will achieve the deeper long-term relevancy that we're all asking the question of during this conference. And hard to reach audiences. So this one is quite a controversial one, but I know we've had a lot of discussions that have happened over the last 2 days, and again within the last few years with data restrictions that are happening across the platforms and across websites. There's this assumption across the industry that diverse audiences, young audiences, niche audiences are hard to reach. They're not. They exist in communities where they're actively engaging and they're being represented. Now, I know there's so many solutions out there, whether it's geographical targeting or interest-based targeting, but ultimately what we need to face is that there is an element of ethics here, even within all this powerful tech that's been developed, of like, how are we actually doing that? Is it unintended discrimination? Is it racial profiling? Working with communities where we know they're gathering, you have the opportunity to not only reach these communities organically, but also extrapolate those audiences and make it bigger, because it's content that, like I said, has been created for the community and by the community. And I'll finish up with a broad statement around how the future is community-driven. And I think the most important thing to ask ourselves is, what do we do with all this? It's not a one-size-fits-all, and I'm definitely not encouraging you to go out and find the next purpose-driven movement that you can and jump on the back of it, because that's absolutely not the case. What I think I would ask myself if I were a brand, which I appreciate I'm not, is which consumers and customers am I having the hardest time reaching? Where are they gathering? Where are they engaging? Where are they having conversations? And then I would open up a conversation with those spaces and try to understand, are there values that we share? Are there conversations that I can contribute to? And is there something I can do to help push this issue or movement or purpose forward in some way? Again, it's all about taking a step back and trying to find out who understands your consumers, because I'm sure you invest a lot of money and research into understanding them, but culture moves quickly, and if you want to be a part of it, you have to show up and stay engaged. So for us, the new frontier is resonance, it's not reach. So whilst tech is at its most powerful, I really want us to think beyond the metrics and really trying to understand how we can positively contribute to your audience beyond your product. And I know we all have sales targets and business figures and percentages to hit, but moving beyond fleeting moments of reach and engagement, which really does feel like a current and very pressing theme of this conference, and more into authentic movements that are going to succeed in the long run, is the way forward. What are the stakes? You've all heard that statistic. I think it was from the Havas report in 2019, which was 81% of brands could disappear today and no one would care. That is a very real statistic, and I know it's something that we all have in the back of our minds, but we're not continuously thinking about on a day-to-day basis, and we believe that if we can have a meme or have a moment, then consumers will think we're cool and relevant and get culture, which in some cases is true. But unless you fail to make a significant emotional impact or a meaning connection with your consumer, ultimately you're going to be less memorable and less impactful in the long term. And like I said, Dove has been doing real beauty for 20 years. Skittles has been doing their commitment for well over a decade. There is no better time than to start now. And if you're in doubt, just look for where the organic engagement lives, because I promise you it is within these communities. And yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what the time is. I've probably spoken far too much to leave time for questions, but what time is it? 11:21. Oh, maybe just on time. Bang on. But if anyone wants to ask me anything or have a conversation, I'll be around. And as you can probably tell, I love to talk. So thank you all.